Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining our discussion this afternoon entitled Disrupt or Be Disrupted. Nick Martin's my name, and together with two of my colleagues from BDO, Jonathan Stone and Tim Riordan, we're going to run a session this afternoon focusing on beyond survival. We ran a webinar last week, and the focus in that was how do you survive COVID and how do you turn your mind to the things that really matter? We touched on three broad options in the initial phase, pressing on, bowing out or locking down. And we'll come back and just touch on those things before we launch into the session. But there's a few housekeeping items which are on the screen, which we'll just give you a moment to digest. I won't read them to you, but just take a moment to read them and we'll then launch into the webinar proper. We are asking all attendees to complete a survey at the end of the webinar, and we'll touch on it again when we get to the end. I mentioned before in our session last week, we talked to three broad options in this extraordinary time, whether it's caused by COVID or any other issue. There's three broad options we consider, and that is to press on, have a plan, carry on. At the other end of the spectrum, we've got this concept of bowing out gracefully, and that might be around where we've worked out for whatever reason that our business model is not sustainable. How do we wind down? How do we exit from an unviable business accelerated by this COVID-19 dilemma that we have before us? And in the middle somewhere is this phase called lockdown, and it's been discussed a bit in the media, but how do we hibernate and how do we use that time to critically review our business? In the session last week, we wrapped up by saying cash is obviously critical in these times. How do we generate for ourselves a cash runway? And how do we be in the best position possible to pop out the other side? There's obviously a number of stimulus packages and support packages from governments and other key stakeholders in various industries and businesses. But one of our key messages last week was be prepared for when this benevolence ends. Adopt a mindset of realism as opposed to optimism. And ensure that when you do pop out the other side, that you do so in good shape, but without significant accrued liabilities. And I think one of the great challenges over the next month or two or three or whatever it ends up being, there'll be a number of businesses which don't address the fundamental issues within their business. They use these various deferral programs, whether it's landlords or debt, or repayment arrangements with statutory authorities or suppliers. I think that's going to create a real issue when businesses restart in whatever the time period might be. So let's use the lead time to ensure that we are critically reviewing our business and making sure that we are in the best shape possible when we pop out the other side. John Stone and Tim Riordan are two of my colleagues that are going to talk to getting your cost model right in the context of getting your business model right. Two of the largest costs we recognise in the majority of businesses is in and around the labour force, but we want to do that in a way that we maximise engagement with our staff, our executives, our leadership teams. Tim's going to talk to how do we improve our processes, or another way, do we need to improve our processes, but just keep an eye on them using a far greater level of rigour and discipline. I'm not going to steal their thunder, but Jono, I might pass to you and let you lead the discussion as we move from the survive phase into the strive phase and look to improve our business model. I'll leave it to you, Jono.
Great, thank you, Nick. And I think what's really important to appreciate is, for those who are on this call, highly likely that you have made the call to carry on. And what you're doing is you are entering rough waters. They're difficult times. And it is the same for everybody. And as Nick has spoken to, there is the opportunity to how do we get our ship shape as much as possible? How do we get ourselves into shape, and how do we take advantage of the rough waters? Because it's in the rough waters where the positions will change. And no doubt, whatever industry you're in, whatever sector you find yourself, you have competitors that will be doing similar things. And the interesting thing that will happen over the COVID-19 period, and as we start to come out the other side, is that those competitors might change. Some might, as Nick alluded to, bow out. There may be new competitors that you have never faced before, coming from similar markets or industries. But importantly, what COVID-19 is starting to present is a once in a lifetime event, which provides for you a once in a career opportunity to actually get after and reshape your business and the future of what that might look like. Already with the rough waters, we've started to see some great innovation from many organisations, large and small. And what we'll share some of those examples with you just now, but consider as I share them with you, many of these things that they have implemented have been strategic priorities for some time. There have been things that have been identified by senior leadership or stakeholders as being critical, and there have been programs in place to implement them. What we have seen in COVID-19 is that these things have taken weeks, even less than a month to implement. A great example of that would be higher education and the move to online learning for students all over the country and globally. The work that academics and administration staff have done in order to make that move has been an amazing effort, taking less than a month to go from largely face-to-face delivery to almost fully online. That is incredible. And things that have been talked about and being talked about for some time. Another example in the health industry is telehealth. Telehealth has been around for some time. The technology has been in place, but has been very much underutilized. With COVID-19, we've seen this incredible uptake by many in the health sector, from GPs to specialists and everybody in between, leveraging telehealth, not just for COVID-19, but for patients and people all over Australia. And it's incredible. And those things will stay with us right through to, there's some of the larger initiatives that have occurred, but there's even been some great local small initiatives. And one for me that is very personal is the sea kayaking group that I paddle with. They have transformed their business from largely group-based sessions to individual programs, one-on-one coaching, and they have found a way to innovate. And what they've done is they've put the customer, their clients, right at the heart of what they're trying to do. They're showing great humanity, and they are taking advantage of the conditions that are before them. All of those examples, I suspect, will continue on post-COVID-19 and actually really support these businesses, but they provide an amazing opportunity. The speed at which this is occurring is unprecedented. And if we were to think about this historically, these changes, if we go back a couple of slides, these changes historically would have taken an enormous amount of time. And if we think about it, just bear with me one moment as we go back. There we go. Having no luck with the slides today. This is a play on a cartoon that I think everyone will be very familiar with. And the key point is here, 3 months ago, everyone, might have even been some of those initiatives we spoke about earlier. But when a change or a program that is identified as being good for the organization, good for the customers, was talked about, everyone thought it was a great idea. In January of this year, if that program was talking about who is actually going to drive the change, everyone starts to run for the hills. Now we have this really unique situation where we have everybody pulling in the same direction. The threat of COVID-19, the way that everybody has come together is such that we now have all players wanting expecting and driving change to occur within organisations, communities, and more broadly through society. And this is unprecedented. So although it's a very, although there are familiar solutions that Tim and I will talk to you about in terms of what you can put in place, the unique circumstances are we've got a once in a lifetime opportunity where we have all of these people pulling in the same direction, not just wanting change, but expecting it. And that is very unique. What I'm going to do now is pass to my colleague, Tim Riordan, who will help us to think about the different opportunities you have depending on your personal circumstance as a business and how you might start to orientate the focus that you have in terms of how do you get yourself shipshape, how do you start to get yourself as fit as possible so that when you come out the other side, you're able to take advantage of whatever the conditions are. And that is incredibly important. Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Jono. Well, everyone's had the pleasure of seeing this slide, so they could have read ahead. And the real, so we don't want to talk through it. The real point is, Nick was talking about the different phases. And in the survive phase, there was a really fundamental fork in the road decision. Do you press on, create the cash runway, give yourself time to set your business up right and succeed on the other side of the crisis, or do you bow out gracefully? Clearly, if you're on this webinar, you probably made the call there. But we have another fork in the road because we've got to make what we do depends on how we see things in the future for our business and our sector of the economy. And what we need to do is more important. And so there's a decision we've got to make, which is fundamental, which is when the crisis is gone, the health crisis is gone, the economic situation is improving. Do you see your business returning to the status quo of 3 months ago? Or do you see, Jono talked to a couple of examples where it might be a different world. Do you see a fundamentally different business environment that you're going to be operating? And while we can talk about how you can change things, that's really fundamental stuff. It's sort of in the strategic realm, but it's more that informs exactly what we're going to do next. So what if we go forward, Jono? What we wanted to do, rather than presume, we know every business is a bit different, but every business is a bit the same as well. We want to get a sense of the audience and just have a simple yes/no question to this group. Do you expect your post-COVID-19 business environment to be significantly different? The significantly different is it can take different forms, but it's not just going back to what we had before. So we might just give people about 10 seconds. There's no right and wrong here, obviously. So don't overthink it. It's just what your gut says about the environment you're operating in. So if you want to make your selection there, and then we might just, in a few seconds, we'll be able to get a bit of a straw poll from the audience. What people are thinking about the current environment are the examples Jono is talking about aberrations, or is that what it's like? There's a lot of people working from home, working remotely. Is that going to remain? Is that going to significantly impact the structure of businesses going forward? So, if we can just close off the poll, and can we get the summaries up on the screen there? Okay. Yeah, well, probably in line with what we were expecting. We were expecting it was going to be something in the order of 60 or 70% would be yes, and 30-odd% would be no, and we missed it by 1%. But there you go. So look, what that actually tells us, and every business is different, as we say, but what that tells us, there's going to be significant change for a lot of people on this call. So what do we do about that? Well, that gives us a few options. So 30-odd% of the people on the call said, we expect to return to status quo. So you've still got a couple of decisions that you've got to make, or one decision that you've got to make there. There's been a lot of talk about hibernating businesses, hunkering down until we get through the crisis, and then we come out the other side and everything's rosy again. So there's still that decision: do we do nothing and wait, not anything material, or do we take the time where we've got all the stakeholder alignment that Jono was talking to actually tweak the business, get it sharper, get it fitter, get it a bit leaner, get it ship shape for when we come out the other side? Because the other thing is we do have a bit of uncertainty around how long this is going to take. So the better shape we're in, probably the better position we're going to be. But that's a fundamental question that we've got for the 31% who responded that it's going back to the old normal. For the people who are saying it's going to be fundamentally different, how different is fundamentally different? We don't know, and you probably don't know, and that's okay at this point. It's okay to actually not have all the answers. But if you think it's going to be fundamentally different, and you want to be one of the boats that takes the lead rather than goes to the back, to use one of the earlier metaphors, that means you've actually got to be thinking about actually transforming how you do things, making a material structural change, whether that's in how you deliver your products and services, or whether that's what your market offer is, your channels to market. You've got to make some fundamental changes. So that's more transformational. And I guess the degree of change that you anticipate also leads to just how bold you've got to be when you embark on changing your business. If it's going to be 2 or 3% change, that's not a huge amount of boldness. You're trimming the sails, really. If it's 50% change, you've got to operate with half the operating cost. Wow, that's a whole new world. So they're the sorts of big decisions that you've got to make as you embark on this. And for the 70% who expect significant change, it's probably going to be transformational. And this is the perfect time, with all the stakeholders aligned, to really make some of those big leaps forward. Now, when we're talking about boldness, like bold, aggressive, out-of-the-box type targets, that really does take leadership. Really needs to be leading from the front, which is a bit of a tautology. But it's actually, even though leadership doesn't know exactly what the answer is, they've actually got to be setting the organisation up for the journey over the next few months. So I might just pass back to Jono to talk about leadership. It's not a masterclass, but some of the key things in this context that need to be thought about. Jono, if you want to take control.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And just having a little bit of trouble there with the audio. I think as Tim was talking about, what is absolutely critical is for the leaders to create the climate for those transformations, or for projects to look at how do you do things better, how do you do things more efficiently, how do you do more effectively, how do you actually service the needs of your customers better than ever. Some of the risks that occur when going through crises such as this is that leadership can try to do it all by themselves. There is a risk to go it alone, or to think that you need to almost be that hero solo leader, sticking your hand up in the air and saying, follow me, this is just what we're going to do. Now, there is certainly an element of leadership needing to take charge at times, but there's a critical importance here to embrace this unique circumstance where you have so many people on side. And so some of the things we're about to talk about are things that for large projects would often take 6 months to a year plus to engage people, get them on board, collaborate effectively, find out what needs to happen, and implement them. And there's this very unique opportunity where we think, and it's been shown, you can do this in a week, a day, a couple of weeks, and actually get the benefits straight away. A key point here is that the changes, and sorry, we are having a bit of trouble with the slides here. The changes that we are looking at and what we are talking about, can be done much faster, but it is all about unlocking the collective power of your business. How do you unleash all the capability and know-how in your business to get the best possible outcomes? And there are 3 key things that we would recommend, particularly when setting a climate that we think that you should focus on. One is, setting the stage, for want of a better word, making sure that you're providing the expectations and the meaning to the organisation, making sure that you're emphasising the purpose. What's at stake? Why does it matter? You may be in service of some of Australia's most vulnerable people if you're in a disability service. You may be providing education to students or in the higher education sector. What is the purpose? What's at stake? Why does it matter that you do what you do and you keep operating as much as anything else? Frame the work and set the expectations. Talk about failure, talk about uncertainty. Make sure that everyone understands the interdependence that is required and the expectation that people will actually pull together and start working as one. Setting the stage is important, and a key quality that is required of leaders is what we might refer to as situational humility. And as we start to think about some of those qualities that are in those bottom boxes, you might like to think about some politicians and how they are playing out at the moment. Jacinda Ardern would be one that comes to mind that has role modelled, and I think many have seen, many of these traits in the way that she's been able to do what we do. So as I talk through some of these elements, have a think about and reflect on what you have seen from her as a leader. And the other one, interestingly, might be somebody like Scott Morrison, who, although maybe didn't start as well as one might hope, he has changed, and his approach has changed. And although nobody is perfect, I'm certainly not perfect, nor is Scott, nor is Jacinda, you will start to see that as leaders, they're starting to do things differently. And a lot of it is in and around things such as situational humility, which is talking about, actually, I don't have the answers. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what it actually looks like. But starting to switch it around and actually engaging your workforce and saying, but together I think we can do this. So situational humility isn't having all the answers. There's a comfortableness in not knowing, and it's actually articulating that. And that's very important. As the next phase, which is important, is inviting participation. And one of the keys to inviting participation is something we would refer to as psychological safety. And this is first termed by a lady named Amy Edmondson, made very popular by Google and their Project Aristotle. And what Google did when they started to look at what was the climate in high-performing teams, and what they found really surprised them. What they thought was potentially low-performing teams was actually exceptionally high. And when they started to look at the teams that were high performing were the ones that were talking equally. Everyone had a seat at the table. Everybody was able to express a view. It almost looked a little bit ad hoc in nature, but what was actually occurring was that everybody felt safe, everybody felt comfortable, and everybody was able to raise their opinion and thoughts at any point in time. Everyone was contributing equally, which is really important. Now, if you think about it in a hierarchical organization, if that's where you find yourself, are you getting equal voice from all of your employees? Are you creating that psychologically safe environment? Is absolutely critical to inviting participation. And for leaders, it's about being curious. It's about practicing inquiry, asking good questions, not shutting down discussions, modeling intense listening as we start to move through. And lastly, it's responding productively. It's expressing appreciation, it's listening, it's acknowledging and thanking inputs from everybody. It's also making sure that people are thinking about what are the capabilities and skills they need to learn and grow. It's about developing self and others. There are some absolutely critical skills that we'll start to talk to as we move through the webinar that is going to be really important for everybody. Tim's already talked about being bold. He's talked about adaptability. and being able to be ready for change, but actually to take that on. The ability to be curious are some really critical, fundamental leadership skills that are going to be required to help navigate COVID-19 and beyond. So once we've set the climate, we can then start to think about what can we do. Now I'm going to pose a question to Tim here, because we do a lot of work on some quite large transformations, not dissimilar to some of the things we called out earlier in the webinar. And with this unique circumstance where we have everybody on board, so we've got all of our stakeholders on board, from employees, unions, all of our shareholders, stakeholders, very much pulling in the same direction. What sort of savings, cost savings, do you think a transformation project, if someone was to embark on it right now, what sort of savings do you think they can generate?
Well, there's a couple of layers to that, Jono, but if you bear with me. Number one, I would say there's transformation and there's sustainable transformation. And the reality is, if you're going to have sustainable change, you've got to win the hearts and minds of people. And in the old normal, there's a whole lot of reasons for people to not get on board, or they're busy in their day jobs, or they've got a lot of other things to do. So in what I'll call the olden days, back in 2019, you really needed to invest time and effort in setting up for success. It might be 6 months to overcome the organisational inertia, and then you've got to keep bringing people along the way. And that's successful transformations would have a massive stakeholder management component and would delay things, well, extend things substantially. I'd probably describe what we've got now, rather than organisational inertia, we've got organisational momentum, which is another way of putting what you were talking about with all those stakeholders being on board. I would say what the sorts of the appetite for change now, and the fact that we can get on with it, and if we're actually in that, give it a go, it's okay to fail and get up and have another go. You can make substantial change in probably, well, 70, 80, 90% less time. And time is, with organisational change, time translates directly into cost. So we might be in the space of what the similar change 12 months ago, you can probably do it for 20%, maybe even 10% of what you would have had to do then, simply because you compress the time so much, because you don't have to go overcome that inertia. But I think that's answering the question, but that's the order of magnitude I think we're talking about here.
Yep. And that's significant. A massive part of all transformation is engaging and mobilising the people, as we spoke about. What we don't want to forget right now, even though we think we can do it fast, is how you do that and what you need to do. And that's really important. So you still need to go through some of those basic fundamental things that we would have done in a larger transformation. And now when we're talking about transformations, it's also important to remember you can be doing this if you're a business owner, or if you've got a smaller business, or it's larger. You can still be doing these processes with your people and unlocking what we might refer to as the collective power of your business. That's really important, because your people know your business better than anybody else. They know where things can be done better. They know how you might be able to service your clients better, or do things just totally differently. And so there are 4 key things that we think you need to do. And not dissimilar to what you would have done, but clearly articulate the challenge, not dissimilar to what I was talking about just before in setting the stage. Create a vision of success and what decisions need, or how decisions are going to be made. And that's really, really critical that your organisation knows that. Make sure the leadership clearly define the design principles, so that the organisation and those you're engaging with know what's at play and where they need to think and what they need to draw within. Some examples of doing this within organisations and these steps and the time it takes would be similar to doing a redesign in an emergency department, where we're getting doctors and nurses and everybody together to rethink how they actually work together. And the design principles help the prototyping, or the how are we actually going to do this. And it's not to say through the design. You don't go outside those design principles, but you always come back into it. And by doing that, it helps people to think about what it is that's really critical to the business and what we need to get after. You need to also provide the resources, whether that's time, whether that's the forum, structure, facilitation to occur. And the last thing is, you need to make that decision and implement and do that quickly. Now, those steps we think can happen in a week to two, given the environment that we're in. The hospital setting that I described earlier, when we were working with them to help them rethink, and we're working with their nurses and doctors and administration staff to help them think about how do they work better together. That took us almost 3 months just to work through that prototyping design stage. The first thing that we were told by the unions was, nurses, don't talk to Jonathan and his team. It took a long time to break down that inertia and actually get people on board and working as one. We've got this really unique opportunity now where that's not the case. People are wanting and expecting the change to happen. The opportunity for all of us is, do you take it? Because we don't have time. Those stakeholder groups, those shareholders, may not be aligned for much longer. So you have to move now. You need to move quickly. And that's the opportunity for everybody. So we're going to pass now, and we have a poll that I'll get Tim to talk to now.
Thanks, Jono. So yeah, time for a bit of audience participation again. So once again, we would ask people for a simple yes/no response to these 3 questions. And we'll touch on the people side. We're also focused on improving the business for the future. And the questions are, do you think your people know how customers could be served better? There's no quantum on that. So it's a yes or no. Do you think that the second question will be, so if you can respond to that as we go. We'll give a few seconds there. And this is really, so why don't we sort of put cards on the table? In our experience, most people who work in organisations have a fair idea on where the dumb stuff is. So how could, and that can be on the customer side. And if we can go on to the next question, Kate, where the question is going to be, do your people have confidence to share and initiate change? This is very much in the realm that Jono was talking to about psychological safety. So and that's really, if they know where there's things that aren't quite right, are they comfortable with speaking up and saying, this is dumb, I think we should be changing this, we should be improving this? Whether they're empowered to, but more about whether they're inclined to. So I'll give you a few seconds to just respond to that. And that's not going to be universal. So it's more, on average, is what would be relevant in our organisation. And if we can move to the third question, okay, which is, do your people know where there are inefficiencies in your organisation? So the first one was about how can we serve our customers better and our stakeholders more broadly. The second one was around, are they inclined to initiate the change? And the third is more on the inefficiency or productivity side, to put it in a more positive way. Do they know where there's room for improved efficiencies? So that's, and what those questions are all getting to is, do the people know? The short answer is, your people will know where some of the opportunities are. Where we went back to the fork in the road type discussion, if you're looking for just trimming the sails and making things better because you expect the business to return back to normal, that could be a great source of opportunities for where you should improve. And actually, if the answer is yes to all of those things, then you should just unleash your people to get on with it. Now, have we got the responses or the summary of those polls in yet, Kate? If we can put them up on the screen, that would be helpful. So there you go, 70% just about, give or take, of people know how customers can be served better. So they know where there's opportunities to do things better at the customer facing side. That's the second question, Kate. So slightly lower, but yeah, that's pretty good. So more than half of organisations have a culture or an environment where people are comfortable with raising things that need to be changed and need to be improved. So that's pretty positive for a lot of organisations. And that's the third question, Kate, if we can just pop up that response, which will probably be somewhere in the similar space. 80% of organisations, people know where the inefficiencies are, which raises, there's an interesting conflict between question 2 and question 3. If they know where 80% know where inefficiencies are, and 70% where customer service could be improved, and more than half can make that happen. Is that already happening? Would be one of the challenges. But certainly that's saying our people typically have a pretty good handle on where we could improve. Does that mean they would know how to transform? Maybe. Does that mean they know how to get things in ship shape, as Jono put it, for the other side? Then I think the answer is a resounding yes there, and it's more about how do we get people empowered to just get on with doing that. So we'll move forward to the next slide. And look, this applies to if you're going to do nothing and wait for to come out the other side, then a lot of this is not particularly important. If it's to get your organisation in better shape, then you want to focus on where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. Because there's a whole lot of improvement initiatives which we can touch on, and we're quite agnostic about them, I'd have to say. So if you've got 3 years, then just creating a continuous improvement culture, and over time things will change. That's not a bad thing, and a lot of organisations have done that in the past, and it creates a great culture of continuous improvement. Where you've got 3 months, you really need a bit more focus around where you want to target some of those activities. And you know, if people have got ideas, and that's okay, but if we've got finite resources that we can deploy to them, then we need to be quite targeted. And in the strive phase, we are very much focusing on the operating side of the business. How do we get better control of our costs? How do we get a lower cost structure? And how do we do that in a sustainable way? And it might also be on asset efficiency. How do we get our assets better utilised? You know, what assets do we need to have? How do we? Nick touched on it a bit last week about getting on top of your working capital as well, but that's a significant asset in a lot of businesses as well. So that's where the focus is, but it is also setting up for thrive in the future. So we don't want to have things which improve cost performance but are negative in terms of revenue growth and revenue generation now and into the future. If we want to transform our business, then we really, from a cost and asset efficiency point of view, then we really do want to focus where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. Now, we have a bit of an adage in our business that, you know, businesses are 80% the same, but they're 20% different. And most businesses are going to have the big cost buckets are going to be around the procurement and purchasing, labour, be it direct or indirect, rents and leases, and you might have some other overheads, which you might have R&D in your business. So there's going to be a few different buckets for the different businesses. But we're not all the same, and we don't all have the same approaches that need to be applied. And if just to take a bit of an example, we've done some work with a major services business in the past where it was all about direct labour, or predominantly about direct labour. That was the number one cost item in the P&L. And the obvious thing is, well, why don't we go and make the field labour force more efficient? Well, the important thing is to understand actually what are your costs, and when you change those costs, how does that impact your business? Because in this environment, the majority of the contracts with customers were cost reimbursable, which you're going to have very happy customers with more efficient workforce. But that wasn't where the initial focus had to go, because it was in the indirect side where all of those, reducing our indirect costs, was going to have a material impact on our clients' profit performance. And in that case, we had a doubling, almost tripling of the EBIT by focusing the activity in the right areas. Now, second phase, yep, great, you want to retain business, and it's great to have more productive workforce and roll over contracts. But it's really, the buckets or the cost categories are probably going to be, there's going to be 70 or 80% overlap from one business to another, but you've really got to understand the drivers of those costs and how they flow through to your financial performance. We did have some basic questions, which are, Jono's going to come back to that in a bit later on, is does everyone in your business understand what creates value and how they create value? How they're linked, how what they do is linked to creating value. So there's some, we shouldn't assume that everyone understands everything. People say things, they mean different things. So that's just something to be conscious of, that we can't assume too much, but yeah, focus on what's going to impact your financial performance. We're going to moving forward to the slide you got on your screen here. So I touched on, you know, we've got the comment here that whether it's incremental change or whether it's transformational change, from an operations excellence point of view, the mechanisms are much the same. And I'm sure most people have been exposed to a range of improvement methods over time. We've got the subtitle that it's not getting this meat and potatoes stuff right is not sexy, but it's very effective. I'm actually going to change my mind on that. I actually think it's very sexy for someone who started out in Japanese automotive. You know, seeing an organisation which is focused on operations excellence, which becomes a competitive advantage for the business. It's actually, and has a material impact on the performance of the business. It's actually, well, it's my sort of sexy anyway. And I think just in terms of what that means, like I mentioned Japanese, but I think when you talk about a range of companies, Japanese and German companies, the expectation is that they do things really thoroughly, really rigorously, and that underpins the whole competitiveness of the business. So very quickly, we touched on major cost drivers. There's a focusing exercise, but isn't the same for everyone. But reimagining the future is a theme that John has touched on, but when you're thinking about transformation, what would it take? Take the blinkers off. What would it take to halve your cost in one of your major cost drivers? Now, will you get there? I don't know. But if you just think about what that might take, that's how you're going to transform. And you don't have to have the answer. You've got to be posing the question. You've got to understand your commercial agreements, as we mentioned a minute ago. Nick, did you have a question there? You might be on mute, Nick.
Listen, I can see the question there, Tim. So maybe I can feel. I think it came from Stephen, and I think we can both probably add to this. But you know, do we think that the definition of value creation will change?
Well, I think the value. The good thing about a lot of businesses is the financials are the report card on value creation or value destruction. So I think the fundamental financial measures aren't going to change, but the operational levers linked to those financial outcomes will change over time. As you go to different business models, as you restructure, you're going to have different levers that you've got to be on top of, and you've got to you've got to impact to actually get the financial outcome. I don't think the report card changes, but I think how we actually impact it is going to change.
Yeah,
I
think also, I think also something that is that customer centricity. You know, that absolute focus on the needs of customers, clients, patients whom we're serving. You know, because we get that right, the rest will flow. You know, and I think that is going to be a more and more the companies and organisations and businesses that are better able to unlock value for those who they serve will be in the best position coming out the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I would say, that I don't want to go through everything chapter and verse because we've touched on most of it through the discussion, but when you're moving at the pace we're talking about, the financial value or performance is historical. So you can't use that to really drive, are we improving? So you need to be setting up, what are our lead indicators, be they around what's really the drivers of the operation. So this question is quite an important one. What do we need to impact in our operating model, which is going to keep us seeing that we're progressing or that we need to change course. Well, the only other thing I would add here is all the methods are the methods, and they can be applied differently in different organisations. But we typically, I've touched on the services example where a significant increase in EBIT by focusing on the right things. Similarly, in manufacturing environments, we've had 50 to 100% increase in throughput and or 30% reduction in operating costs by getting the focus right on the right things. And we'll touch on it in a minute, but asset intensive organisations, we've seen 50% plus improvement in capital efficiency in how you deploy your CapEx. So we keep moving along, Jono, in that vein. So a lot of it has been talking about business as usual type operations. I deal with a lot of capital intensive type organisation, and coming from an operations improvement background, I'm flabbergasted by the opportunity for having a significant impact on capital productivity by doing really basic stuff, getting your shot selection right around prioritising where you invest, linking it to real business value, and also getting the business as usual somewhere in the business as usual operation, taking accountability for realising the benefits. If you can't get that, then don't invest the capital. Have good governance, not just a steering committee. Actually monitor progress and make decisions around how you're going. And project productivity, a massive area for improvement. One of the least productive, or not least productive, one of the sector that's had one of the worst productivity improvement track records over decades. So there's massive potential there. It's interesting, a lot of projects don't really have a psychological safety environment or safe psychological environment. So actually getting the challenge, there's assumptions are made, and the project continues on. So if you're spending a lot of CapEx, get a lot of rigor into how you specify what you're doing, how you choose projects, how you govern them, and how they're actually executed. So I think we're about on track, but just wanted to reiterate one of the messages that we had earlier, and this is the blue circles are really reflecting, if you get away from the actual technique that you're going to apply, it's actually not a destination, it's a journey when you're talking about operational improvement and operational excellence. But if you can get the people owning it and invested in it, which you have the perfect opportunity now, you actually have continuous improvement. You can get the step change, and then you can get ongoing improvement. But more importantly, we talk about strive, setting up for thrive. Having very effective operations creates enormous flexibility in your pricing and your service offer to the market, and that is really setting you up for the organic growth in Thrive, and also gives you the higher margins and stronger balance sheet for actually taking the opportunities around inorganic or M&A acquisitions in the Thrive phase, when you're either getting through the choppy waters or you get through to the calm waters on the other side. And naturally, they've got to flow through to financial performance, which in this case is you can impact higher margins, higher operating margins, and you can be impacting revenue growth by doing the fundamentals that you do better. Jono, I might just hand over to you to have a bit of a wrap up, and also just what people can think about doing to apply some of this stuff in the immediate term.
No, thank you, Tim, and I think that is an exceptionally good point, and to draw on that combination of both the ability to leverage your people like never before to do these types of processes and this type of operational excellence work quicker than I think previously imagined is the opportunity that many businesses have right at this point in time. Those four capabilities, to reiterate them, that we think are really, really critical. You know, that teaming, we see teaming as absolutely the cornerstone of being able to do well through COVID-19 and beyond. And importantly, it's teaming, not teams. There's a really important distinction for people to think about there in relation to teams are bounded, they work together over a long period of time, they learn from each other, they learn how to interact well together, they become high performing through those training and working together as one. Teaming is more about how do we see the qualities that we see in teams whenever we have people coming together to work on interdependent tasks. And that can happen in the moment on business critical issues that might arise. It might be on executing some of the initiatives that might be identified through this process. But what we're going to see, particularly also with people being remote, is the importance of teaming is going to be absolutely critical. We've spoken a lot about curiosity. We've spoken a lot about adaptability as we've moved through, and boldness. And I think as we close the webinar, we believe that you have the means to prepare the business for the other side. The question is, how bold are you going to be? And that's really up to each and everyone who is on this call and beyond. How bold do you want to be, and are you prepared to take this on? And importantly, what we want to do, because we do appreciate that although many businesses are similar, everyone is somewhat unique, leave you with some questions that right from this afternoon, tomorrow, next week, you can go back into your organizations and you can start to ask or talk to your people about. And there are three key themes that you can see here. One is start to demonstrate, if you're not already, and we're already seeing great examples of situational humility, use it. Don't go in saying you know everything. Start to role model it. But ask your leadership team, how does your business create value? Which actually might tie back to that question earlier. How do you create value now? How is it changing? And importantly, how do you create value not just for your shareholders, those who might own the business or who might have stakes in it, or the board itself, but also customers, clients, patients? How do you create value? What are the key cost drivers in the business? Tim has spoken, at length about some of those. What are they? You would assume everyone would know them, but sometimes now is the right time to ask the dumb questions. If our survival depends on it, how much could we save? So if our survival absolutely depended on saving some money or cutting some costs or finding more efficient and effective ways to do it, how would we do it? And what would it take from your organization? So there are some key questions that you can go away and think about. The other things that we think people can go away and have a consider about is, where are your highest impact initiatives? So what are the things that if you were to put in place would create the biggest impact on your business. And that might be right now, it might be into the future. It's certainly, we would encourage you to be thinking it through the lens of your customers, clients, patients. But once that's identified, identify the main operational lever that is impacted and expected improvements. Mobilize and empower teams to deliver. So what we mean by that is make sure that the decisions aren't all coming back up to the top. Empower people, get the right people together, give them a very clear purpose on what the task is, make sure you delegate them the ability to act, set them up, let them get after it, and provide them the opportunities to actually solve some of those critical problems now, or get after some of the initiatives that might be identified. And another one to ask there is, what new capabilities do you need ahead? Might be some of the ones we've spoken about today. There might be some other ones that are really unique to your organization, particularly if you're reimagining the future. Think about the academics now teaching on an online platform. You know, think about GPs now starting to work via telehealth, teams having to come together on Zoom to do critical work. Things are changing. What are those new capabilities that you need to focus on? Make sure you are measuring. Tim called this out earlier. Nearly everyone will have financial measures, and they are important, don't get us wrong, but they are a lag measure that is telling you about what happened maybe 3 months ago. 2-3 months ago, you might have been flying. What is really important is that you have lead indicators. What are the things that are going to tell you that you're on the right track now? What are the things that you're committing to and looking to implement, maybe through some of the processes we've talked about today? How are you going to know you've created a psychologically safe environment? How are you going to know you're starting to make good headway on some of those operational levers? And above all else, this is a culture. The last point is a cultural thing. Make sure that whatever you agree to, both as a leadership and as an organization, those commitments are being tracked and progressed. What you say and what you do align. If you say you're going to be bold, are you being bold? If you say you're going to be adaptive, are you being adaptive? If you say you're going to really target and drive 50% out of one of those key operational levers, do you do it? Make sure that you're tracking those and they are on hand. As we said, both Tim and myself, there is a really unique opportunity to do things with your people, with your shareholders, more than I think ever before, certainly in our careers. Are you going to be bold enough to take that on and leverage the opportunity? Speed is of the essence. You don't have time to wait because things will change very quickly. And how prepared are you to unleash the latent power of your organization? Get people involved, don't put it all on your own shoulders. Again, from Tim, myself, and Nicholas, thank you so much for being with us today. There's a survey at the conclusion of this webinar that we would appreciate if you could fill out. We will be in contact with the slides and other information. And if there's anything you would like to know more about, might be some of the methodology or the approaches or the how-to in a bit more detail, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to have a chat and help people through this really critical time. Thank you very much.